They called her the Mouse. For 6 months, Casey cleaned bedpans, took the night shifts nobody wanted, and let the head surgeon scream in her face for mistakes she didn't make. To the staff at Mercy General, she was invisible, a timid entry-level nurse who shook when spoken to. They didn't know that the trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. They didn't know that the hands scrubbing the floors had once held the lives of Tier 1 operators in the mountains of Kandahar. And they certainly didn't expect the day a Black Hawk helicopter would descend on the hospital roof, shutting down the entire city block just to find her. The Mouse wasn't scared of them. She was just waiting for orders. This is the story of how the hospital's invisible woman became its legend. The fluorescent lights of Mercy General's emergency department hummed with that specific headache-inducing frequency that only people on the graveyard shift seemed to notice. It was 3:14 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday in Chicago, the kind of night where the air in the trauma bay felt heavy, smelling of antiseptic wet wool and old coffee. Casey Rhodes stood by the nurse's station, her posture slightly hunched, eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum tiles. She was 32, though she looked younger, with her hair pulled back in a severe fraying bun, and her scrub top slightly too large for her athletic frame. She was the newest hire, a floater nurse who picked up the slack wherever the schedule had a hole. "Rhodes, are you deaf or just stupid?" The voice cracked through the hallway like a whip. Dr. Gregory David, the hospital's star trauma surgeon and self-appointed king of the ER, slammed a clipboard onto the counter. He was a man who spent more time on his hair than his patient charts, handsome in a polished, media-friendly way, and absolutely venomous to anyone he deemed beneath his pay grade. Casey didn't flinch. She just looked up, her expression a blank slate. "Dr. David, I was just organizing the—" "I don't care if you were organizing the Vatican archives," David snapped, pointing a manicured finger at bed 6. "I asked for a standard saline drip for the drunk in bed 6 10 minutes ago. Why is he still dry? Bed 6 has a history of congestive heart failure." "Doctor," Casey said, her voice soft, almost monotonous. "His chart wasn't updated, but I noticed the edema in his ankles. A standard saline load could flush his lungs. I was waiting for you to sign off on a slower drip rate." David's face went a shade of red that matched the hazardous waste bins. The other nurses, Brenda, the charge nurse, who had been at Mercy since the Reagan administration, and Jessica, a gossip-loving intern, stopped what they were doing to watch. This was the nightly entertainment, the flaying of the mouse. "You noticed—" David laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You noticed ankle swelling, Rhodes. You've been a nurse for, 5 minutes? I graduated top of my class from Johns Hopkins. You graduated from— where was it? Some community college in Idaho." "Tennessee," Casey corrected quietly. "Right, Tennessee. Well, in Chicago, nurses don't diagnose. They do what they are told. Hang the bag, Rhodes, or I'll have you written up for insubordination so fast your head will spin back to the potato fields." "It's Tennessee, sir. They grow tobacco," Casey murmured, but she moved before he could explode again. She walked to the supply closet, her movements efficient, almost robotic. As she passed the station, she heard Brenda whisper loudly to Jessica, "God, she's pathetic. No backbone at all. I don't know how she passed the boards. She shakes every time a trauma comes in." "I heard she used to work in a nursing home," Jessica giggled, checking her phone. "Probably used to wiping chins and playing bingo. She's not built for the ER. She'll wash out by Christmas." Casey heard every word. Her hearing had been tested at perfect pitch, a requirement for the job she used to have. She entered the supply closet, and let the heavy door click shut. For a split second, the mask dropped. The dull, bovine expression vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory sharpness. Her eyes, a piercing grey, scanned the shelves. She took a deep breath, counting it down. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. She wasn't shaking from fear. She was shaking from the adrenaline withdrawal of living a life at 100 miles per hour and slamming into a brick wall of bureaucracy. She grabbed the saline bag. She would hang it at the slower rate she knew was safe, and she would simply adjust the flow regulator when David wasn't looking. It was the 3rd time this week she'd saved a patient from David's ego without him knowing. When she returned to the floor, the chaos she had been sensing in the air finally arrived. The automatic doors blew open. 2 paramedics rushed in, pushing a gurney surrounded by police officers. GSW male 25 hit in the chest and thigh. The lead paramedic shouted, "BP is crashing, 80/50. David instantly switched into his TV doctor mode. "Get him to trauma 1. Rhodes, stay out of the way, Brenda. You're with me." Casey stepped back against the wall, melding into the background. This was her role, the silent observer. But as the gurney flew past her, she saw something the others missed. The patient wasn't just bleeding from the chest. There was a dark arterial spurting coming from the inner thigh, hidden by the dark denim of his jeans. A femoral bleed. If they focused on the chest and ignored the leg, he would bleed out in 3 minutes. She watched David cut the shirt open. "Crack the chest kit he's tamponading," David yelled. "Doctor the leg," Casey said. It wasn't a shout, but it cut through the noise with a strange harmonic authority. "I said, get out." David didn't even look back. Casey looked at the floor. She looked at the clock. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. She didn't make a decision. Muscle memory made it for her. Casey moved. To the observers, it looked like a blur. 1 second she was by the wall, the next she was at the foot of the gurney. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for the order. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a pair of heavy-duty trauma shears, and in one fluid motion, ripped the denim of the patient's jeans from the knee to the hip. Blood erupted like a geyser, splattering the pristine glass of the cabinet doors 3 feet away. "What the hell are you doing?" Brenda shrieked. David froze the scalpel hovering over the man's chest. Casey didn't look up. She jammed her fist directly into the open wound in the man's thigh, her knuckles white, locating the severed femoral artery by feel in a mess of torn muscle. She found the slippery, pulsing tube and clamped it hard against the femur bone. The fountain of blood stopped instantly. "Femoral artery severed," Casey said. Her voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the soft mumble of the mouse. It was a flat, gravelly report. He didn't have a tamponade in the chest. He was hypovolemic from the leg bleed. If you had cracked his chest, the pressure drop would have killed him instantly. Silence descended on Trauma 1. The only sound was the beeping of the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. The heart rate was stabilizing. The blood pressure began to tick up. 85/60. 90/65. David stared at the leg, then at Casey's bloody hand, holding the man's life together. His ego wrestled with reality, and for a moment reality won. He saw the wound. She was right. "Clamp," David choked out. Brenda fumbled, handing him a vascular clamp. David moved in, taking over the bleed. "I've got it. I got it." "Step back, Rhodes." Casey released the artery and stepped back. Her hands coated in crimson up to the wrists. She held them up in the sterile pose, her face returning to that vacuous, empty expression. "Get him to surgery," David muttered, not making eye contact with her. "Now." As the team rushed the patient out, the adrenaline in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a confused tension. Brenda stayed behind, staring at Casey. "How did you know?" Brenda asked, her voice suspicious. "The blood. It wasn't even soaking through the jeans yet. How did you know it was arterial?" Casey walked to the sink and began scrubbing her hands. The water turned pink. "I saw the way his foot was turned, and the color of his skin. It was gray, not pale. That means lower extremity loss." "That's not in the nursing handbook," Brenda said, narrowing her eyes. "I read a lot," Casey said simply. She dried her hands with a paper towel. "I'm going to go check on the drunk in bed 6. She walked away, her shoulders rolling forward again, shrinking back into the role of the invisible servant. But Brenda wasn't buying it anymore. She walked over to the trash can, where Casey had thrown the paper towel. She paused. The trauma shears Casey had used were sitting on the counter. Brenda picked them up. They weren't the standard issue hospital scissors. These were matte, black, heavy steel with a serrated edge capable of cutting through a penny. Engraved on the handle, worn down by years of friction, was a small insignia. It was barely visible, just scratches to the untrained eye. A trident, an eagle, an anchor, and a name etched in tiny letters: C. Rhodes. SARC 8. Brenda frowned. She didn't know what SARC meant. She assumed it was a brand name. She dropped the scissors back on the tray. "Weirdo," she muttered. The next morning, Casey was summoned to the hospital administrator's office. Mr. Henderson was a man who looked like a turtle in a 3-piece suit. He sat behind a mahogany desk flanked by Dr. David, who looked smug. "Ms. Rhodes," Henderson began, folding his hands. "We have a problem." "Is the patient okay?" Casey asked. "The patient is alive, yes," Henderson said dismissively. "But Dr. David has filed a formal complaint regarding your conduct. He states that you physically interfered with a surgical procedure, endangered a patient, and displayed what was the phrase, reckless cowboy behavior in the trauma bay." Casey looked at David. He smirked. "You got lucky, Rhodes. You guessed right. But in my ER, we follow chain of command. You don't jam your hands into a patient unless I tell you to. You're a liability." "I saved his life," Casey said. "You got blood on my shoes," David countered. "We are putting you on probation," Henderson said, sliding a paper across the desk. 2 weeks, restricted duties. You are not to enter the trauma bays. You will handle triage paperwork and janitorial overflow if needed. One more toe out of line, one more instance of you playing doctor, and you are terminated. Is that clear?" Casey looked at the paper. It was a formal reprimand, insubordination, unprofessional conduct. She thought about the letter sitting in her drawer at home, the one from the Department of the Navy begging her to come back as a consultant, the one that called her Chief, the one that mentioned the Distinguished Service Cross. She looked at Henderson, then at David. She picked up the pen. "Crystal clear, sir," she said. She signed the paper. She walked out of the office back to the floor. She spent the next 6 hours mopping the waiting room and checking temperatures for kids with the flu. She thought the day couldn't get worse. But at 1400 hours, the television in the waiting room flashed a breaking news banner. "Hostage situation at downtown Federal Building. Multiple casualties reported." The news anchor's voice was shrill. "We are getting reports that a domestic terror group has breached the Federal Reserve outpost on Jackson Street. SWAT is pinned down. There are reports of a chemical agent being used." Casey stopped mopping. She looked at the screen. The camera zoomed in on the perimeter. She saw the police lines, but her eyes focused on something else. In the background of the shot, barely visible, a black SUV had pulled up. Men were getting out. They weren't wearing SWAT blues. They were wearing multicam trousers and carrying HK-416 rifles with suppressors. She knew that gear. She knew the way they moved. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A single vibration. She ignored it. She was a nurse on probation. It buzzed again. 3 times. The emergency pattern. She pulled the phone out. Unknown number. She answered. Rhodes. Chief. A voice crackled. It was deep, distorted by wind noise. We have a situation. We are in Chicago. We have a generic biological threat. The team is exposed. Our medic is down. We are 10 minutes out from your location. We need an extraction point and we need a clean room. We are coming to you. I'm at a civilian hospital, Viper, Casey whispered, turning her back to the waiting room. I can't authorize a drop. We aren't asking for authorization. Casey, the voice said, we are bringing the asset in. And you're the only one in the hemisphere who knows the antidote protocol for VX2 nerve gas. Get the roof ready. ETA 9 minutes. The line went dead. Casey looked around the crowded waiting room. A kid was crying. An old man was coughing. Dr. David was walking by, laughing on his cell phone about his golf handicap. Casey dropped the mop. It clattered loudly against the tiles. Rhodes, pick that up, Brenda yelled from the desk. Casey unbuttoned her scrub top, revealing a grey t-shirt underneath. She walked straight toward the elevators. Rhodes! Where are you going? David shouted. To the roof, Casey said, not stopping. You're fired, David roared. Not yet, she said. But you might want to call the FAA. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like it took a lifetime, though it was only 30 seconds. Casey didn't waste them. She ripped the hair tie from her bun, letting her hair fall loose, not for style, but because she needed to use the elastic to tie her scrub sleeves tight above her elbows. Loose fabric was a liability in a rotor wash. When the doors opened on the 8th floor, administration and pharmacy, she stepped out with a stride that would have terrified a drill instructor. She bypassed the admin desks and went straight to the inpatient pharmacy window. Paul, the head pharmacist, looked up over his glasses. He was a stickler for paperwork, who once made a surgeon wait 20 minutes for Tylenol because a form was missing a date. Rhodes. Paul blinked. You're not authorized for this floor. And you look intense. Paul, I need the crash cart keys and the reserve chem pack, Casey said. Her voice was level, but there was a vibration in it that made the hair on Paul's arms stand up. The chem pack. Paul laughed nervously. Casey, that's for mass casualty events, terrorist attacks. I can't just code black Paul. Authorization Alpha Sierra 9. Paul froze. He stopped laughing. That's a military override code. How do you know that? Open the cage, Casey said. She didn't shout. She leaned in her grey eyes, locking onto his. If you don't give me the atropine and the 2-PAM chloride in the next 30 seconds, 4 men are going to die on your roof. And after they die, the gas coming off their uniforms is going to seep into the HVAC system and kill everyone in the NICU. Do you want that on your conscience? Paul turned pale. He fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking. He unlocked the secure cage. Casey vaulted over to the counter, grabbing 3 boxes of auto-injectors and a bag of saline. "Call the ER," she ordered as she grabbed a portable radio from the security desk. "Tell them to clear Trauma Bay 1 and 2. Seal the vents. Positive pressure only. If David argues, tell him it's a CDC mandate." She didn't wait for an answer. She sprinted for the stairwell that led to the helipad. The roof access door was heavy steel, locked with a keypad. Casey didn't have the code. She didn't even slow down. She raised her leg and drove her heel into the mechanism with a sickening crunch of metal. The lock shattered. She slammed her shoulder into the door, bursting out into the cold, windy Chicago afternoon. The helipad was a disaster. It was officially inactive, used mostly as a smoking spot for stressed doctors and storage for broken HVAC units. There were old pallets, a rusted gurney, and loose gravel everywhere. "Debris on the LZ," she muttered to herself. She began dragging the heavy pallets to the edge, tossing them over the safety railing onto the lower roof. She moved with a strength that defied her thin frame. She cleared the rusted gurney, shoving it into the stairwell. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" The shout came from the door. It was Mr. Henderson, red-faced and panting, flanked by 2 hospital security guards and Dr. David. "She's lost her mind," David yelled, pointing at her. "She's destroying hospital property. Arrest her." The 2 guards, burly men named Miller and Davis, who usually spent their day dealing with drunk patients, stepped forward. "Miss Rhodes, you need to come down. Now." Casey stood in the center of the painted H, the wind whipping her scrub pants. She checked her watch. 2 minutes. "Stay back," Casey warned. "You don't want to be up here." "Grab her," Henderson ordered. Miller lunged for her. It was a lazy grab, the kind you use on a confused patient. Casey didn't strike him. She simply stepped inside his guard, used his own momentum, and swept his leg. Miller hit the concrete hard. Before Davis could react, Casey had spun him around and put him in a standing arm lock, pinning him against the stairwell wall. "Listen to me," she barked, her voice cutting through the wind. "There is a Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk inbound, hot and heavy. If you are standing on this pad when it flares, the rotor wash will blow you off the roof. Get inside, lock the door, and do not open it until I say so." David stared at her mouth agape. "A Black Hawk. You're delusional. You're having a psychotic break." Thwop, thwop, thwop. The sound started as a vibration in the soles of their feet. Then it became a rhythmic thumping in their chests. David looked up. "What is that?" Henderson whispered. "Get down!" Casey screamed. She released the guard and shoved Henderson and David toward the stairwell alcove. The sky above Mercy General darkened. A massive black shape roared over the edge of the building, the sound deafening. The wind hit them like a physical blow. David lost his footing and fell. The sheer power of the military helicopter hovering just 10 feet above the roof was terrifying. This wasn't a sleek medical transport chopper. This was a war machine. No markings, no lights, just matte black steel and the barrel of a minigun visible in the doorframe. The Black Hawk didn't touch down. The roof wasn't rated for the full weight. It held a low hover wheels inches from the concrete. The downdraft kicked up grit and dust, blinding David and Henderson, who were cowering by the door. But Casey stood tall. She walked directly into the storm. She raised her arms, crossing them in an X, then slashing them down the signal for hold position. The side door of the chopper slid open. 4 men jumped out. They were dressed in full tactical gear, but their movements were sloppy, desperate. 2 of them were carrying a 3rd man between them. The 4th man, the team leader, jumped out last, carrying a black Pelican case. They crouched under the rotors and ran toward Casey. The team leader, a giant of a man with a beard and a scar running down his cheek, stopped in front of Casey. He wasn't looking at the hospital administrator. He wasn't looking at the terrified security guards. He was looking at the nurse. He snapped to attention, and despite the chaos, rendered a sharp, crisp salute. "Chief Rhodes," he shouted over the engine roar, "asset is secure, but he's fading. Exposure was direct. Skin contact. 5 minutes ago." Casey didn't salute back. Civilians don't salute. Instead, she grabbed the team leader's vest. "Did you decon him in the bird?" "Negative. No water. Just cut the gear." "Get him to the door. Don't touch anyone. Don't let anyone touch you." Casey turned to David, who was trying to stand up, his expensive hairpiece nearly blown away. Casey marched over to him, grabbed him by the lapels of his white coat, and hauled him close. "Dr. David," she said. The meekness was gone. The mouse was dead. In her place was a woman who had commanded triage units in active war zones. "I'm commandeering your trauma center. You are going to clear the hallway. You are going to tell Brenda to prep 4 IV lines with atropine, and you are going to stay out of my way. Do you understand?" David looked at the giant soldiers behind her, their weapons slung across their chests, their faces masked in grim determination. He looked at Casey, really seeing her for the first time. Yes, he stammered. "Move!" The group burst through the stairwell door. Casey led the way, running down the stairs 2 at a time because the elevator was too slow. The SEALs followed, carrying their fallen comrade. When they burst into the ER, the entire floor went silent. Patients stopped moaning. Nurses froze with needles in midair. The sight was surreal. A janitorial nurse, covered in grit, leading a phalanx of Navy SEALs through the double doors of Trauma 1. "Clear the room!" Casey yelled. "Masks on everyone now!" She kicked the door to Trauma 1 open, put him on the bed, cut the rest of his clothes off, double-bag them immediately. The patient, a young man no older than 24, was seizing violently. His skin was pale, his lips blue. Foam was gathering at the mouth. "Viper, hold his legs," Casey ordered the team leader. "Ghost, hold the head. I need airway." Brenda, the charge nurse, stood in the doorway, trembling. "Casey, what is this VX nerve agent?" Casey said, grabbing the laryngoscope. "It paralyzes the diaphragm. He can't breathe. I'm intubating." Brenda pushed 2 milligrams of atropine, followed by 600 of pralidoxime. "Now." I can't take orders from a nurse," Brenda stuttered, looking at David, who had just run in. "Doctor." David looked at the seizing soldier. He looked at the monitor. Heart rate 180, oxygen 60%. "Do it!" David screamed at Brenda. "Do what she says." Casey slid the tube down the soldier's throat with a precision that made David's best work look clumsy. "I'm in. Bag him." She grabbed the soldier's wrist. "Talk to me, kid. Stay with us." The soldier's eyes fluttered open. They were pinned pupils the size of needle points, a classic sign of nerve agent poisoning. He looked at Casey, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. "Chief," he wheezed around the tube. "You came back." "I never left, soldier," Casey said softly. She looked up at the team leader. "Give me the chem pack." The bearded SEAL opened the Pelican case. Inside were vials of experimental antidote. "This is unapproved, FDA," David warned, stepping forward. "If you inject that and he dies, it's murder." Casey loaded a syringe. "If I don't inject this, he's dead in 2 minutes. And Dr. David." She paused, the needle hovering over the soldier's arm. "Yeah. If he dies, My friends here aren't going to sue you." The bearded SEAL turned to David. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise his weapon. He just stared at the doctor with eyes that had seen things David couldn't imagine in his nightmares. "If she says, 'Stand down, doctor,' you stand down." David took a step back, hitting the wall. Casey injected the serum. The room held its breath. The monitor beeped frantically. Beep, 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 beep. Then silence. The seizing stopped. The soldier's body went limp. "Flatline," Brenda yelled. "He's coding." "No, he's not," Casey said calmly, her fingers on his carotid artery. "He's resetting. Watch. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Beep. A slow, strong beat. Beep. "Sinus rhythm," Casey announced. "BP is stabilizing. Oxygen is coming up. 85, 90, 98. She exhaled a long, shaky breath. She patted the soldier on the shoulder. "Welcome back to the world, kid." The bearded SEAL slumped against the wall, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked at Casey. "That was close, Rhodes. Too close. Command owes you, big time." "Command owes me a new door lock on the roof," Casey said, wiping grime from her face. It was only then that she noticed the silence in the room. She turned around. The entire ER staff was gathered at the glass doors of the trauma bay. Nurses, orderlies, patients. And right in the front, Mr. Henderson and Dr. David. They were staring at her. Not at the SEALs, at her. David looked at the monitor, then at Casey. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Really?" Casey began to strip off her contaminated gloves. She looked down at her scrubs, stained with oil and dirt. "I'm just the nurse who cleans the bedpans, doctor," she said. "Bullshit," the SEAL leader growled. He stepped forward, towering over David. "You're talking to Master Chief Hospital Corpsman Casey Rhodes, Navy Cross recipient, the only woman to ever complete the SARC pipeline and serve with Development Group. She's not a nurse. She's the best combat medic the Navy ever had." He looked around the room, his gaze challenging anyone to disagree. "And if you people had any idea who was mopping your floors," the SEAL added, "you'd be saluting her every time she walked in the room." Henderson cleared his throat, looking terrified. I see. Well, perhaps we can discuss a promotion." Casey laughed. It was a dry, tired sound. "I don't want a promotion, Mr. Henderson. I want a day off." "Granted," Henderson squeaked. But the drama wasn't over. As the SEALs began to secure the room, the double doors of the ER entrance burst open again. This time it wasn't a patient. It was 4 men in dark suits with earpieces. FBI. And behind them, a man in a Navy dress uniform with stars on his collar. Admiral Vance, weight user, said, "Don't use Vance." Correction. Admiral Graves. Admiral Graves marched straight up to David. "Who is in charge here?" "I am," David said, puffing up his chest slightly. "Get your people out," Graves barked. "This facility is now under the jurisdiction of the Department of Defense. We are locking down the building." He turned to Casey. His harsh expression softened instantly. "Chief Rhodes," the Admiral said, nodding. "I should have known. When I heard a civilian hospital had managed to stabilize a VX exposure, I knew it had to be you. I thought you were retired." "I am, sir," Casey said. "Not anymore," Graves said. He pulled a folder from his aide's hand. "The President has authorized your reactivation, effective immediately." Casey looked at the folder. She looked at her quiet life at Mercy General. She looked at David, who was now looking at her with a mix of fear and awe. "I have a contract here, Admiral," Casey said. "I have responsibilities." "We'll buy the hospital if we have to," Graves said deadpan. "Suit up, Rhodes. We have a situation in the North Sea, and your team refuses to deploy without you." Casey looked at the SEAL leader. He grinned. "Come on, Casey. The janitor closet will still be here when we get back." The atmosphere in the emergency room had shifted from chaotic panic to a stunned, reverent silence. The air pressure seemed to drop as Admiral Graves laid the mission parameters out on the trauma bay counter right on top of Dr. David's forgotten clipboard. "We have a shadow vessel, the Dauntless, currently taking on water in the North Sea." Graves said, his voice low, but carrying to every corner of the room. "It was hit by a rogue wave during a Black Ops extraction. We have 7 Tier 1 operators trapped in the pressurized diving bell. Their CO2 scrubbers are failing. One of them has a collapsed lung and a spinal injury. We can't just pull them up. The decompression sickness will kill them before they break the surface. We need someone who can dive down, enter the bell under pressure, stabilize the spine, and perform a chest tube insertion at 400 feet below sea level." Graves looked at Casey. "There are only 3 people in the world certified for hyperbaric combat trauma. And the other 2 are in Okinawa." Casey finished, her eyes scanning the tactical map. "Exactly." Graves nodded. "I need gear," Casey said. She didn't look at David. She didn't look at Henderson. She was already mentally underwater, calculating gas mixtures and dive times. "Way ahead of you, Chief," Viper said. He kicked the Pelican case open. Right there in the middle of Trauma 1, Casey Rhodes stripped off her stained, oversized scrubs. Underneath, she wore simple thermal leggings and a tank top, the uniform of someone who was always cold because her metabolism ran too hot. She pulled on the tactical pants, the material heavy and fire-resistant. She laced up the combat boots, her movements efficient, tying them with a specific knot that wouldn't slip. She shrugged into the plate carrier, the heavy ceramic armor settling on her shoulders like a familiar embrace. Finally, she clipped a radio to her shoulder and tied her hair back tight. She looked at her reflection in the glass cabinet doors. The tired, hunched woman who cleaned vomit off the floor was gone. Standing there was a warrior. Dr. David watched this transformation with his mouth slightly open. He looked at the scrubs lying in a pile on the floor, the uniform he had mocked her for wearing just an hour ago. "You—" David started, his voice trembling with a mix of indignation and confusion. "You can't just leave. You're on the schedule. I haven't signed your time card. This is abandonment of post." Casey turned slowly. She adjusted the strap of her medical bag. She walked up to David until she was inches from his face. She was shorter than him, but in that moment, she seemed to tower over the room. "Dr. David," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "For 6 months, I have watched you belittle nurses who know more than you. I have watched you ignore patients because they didn't have the right insurance. I have fixed your mystatics in the dark, so you could shine in the light." She reached into her tactical vest and pulled out her hospital ID badge, the one that said C. Rhodes, CNA, Janitorial Support. "You're right. I am abandoning my post." She dropped the badge into the pocket of his pristine white lab coat. "Because I have a job to do that actually matters." "Let's move," Viper barked. The team surrounded her, a protective diamond formation, and they moved toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open, and the roar of the Black Hawk outside grew louder. As Casey stepped onto the tarmac, the wind whipping her hair, she looked back one last time. The entire hospital staff was pressed against the glass, watching. Brenda looked ashamed. Paul the pharmacist gave a thumbs up, and David just stood there, looking small, holding the ID badge of the woman he had called the Mouse. Casey grabbed the handle of the helicopter door and hauled herself in. The bird lifted off, banking hard over the Chicago skyline, disappearing into the grey clouds. The North Sea was a raging nightmare of black water and white foam. The storm had intensified, turning the ocean into a churning washing machine of 30-foot swells. Casey sat in the back of a larger transport helicopter, now a Pave Hawk rigged for search and rescue. She was already in her dry suit, the heavy rubber seal tight around her neck. 2 minutes to drop, the pilot screamed over the comms. It's messy down there. Road's visibility is 0. I don't need to see, Casey yelled back. Just get me close to the buoy. The mission was insanity. The diving bell was tethered to a sinking support ship, dangling precariously at 400 feet. The line was fraying. If it snapped, the 7 men inside would plummet to the ocean floor, crushed by the pressure instantly. She had to splash down, dive to the bell lock-in, and medically stabilize the commander so they could initiate an emergency ascent. Green light, go, go, go. Casey didn't hesitate. She rolled backward out of the helicopter, plummeting 30 feet into the freezing, roiling ocean. The cold hit her like a hammer, even through the suit. She fought the waves, kicking toward the flashing strobe light of the marker buoy. A support diver was waiting for her with the umbilical line. "Chief, you good?" The diver's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Send me down," Casey ordered. The descent was a blur of darkness. As she went deeper, the chaotic thrashing of the storm above faded, replaced by the crushing, silent weight of the ocean. The pressure built in her ears. At 400 feet, the darkness was absolute, broken only by the beam of her headlamp. There it was, the bell. It was tilted at a 45-degree angle, swinging violently in the current. She latched onto the airlock wheel. It was jammed. "Viper, this is Rhodes." She spoke into her comms, her voice calm despite the nitrogen narcosis trying to cloud her brain. "Airlock is jammed. I'm going to have to percussive maintenance it." She braced her boots against the hull and used a heavy wrench to hammer the locking mechanism. Clang, clang. It groaned and spun. She cycled the hatch and pulled herself inside. The smell hit her first sweat, blood, and fear. The bell was tiny, packed with 7 large men. The air was thick and stale. "Rhodes," a voice croaked from the back. It was Commander Ricks, the man with the spinal injury. He was strapped to a makeshift litter, his face grey. "I'm here, Commander," Casey said, stripping off her dive mask. She immediately went to work. "Status: lung collapsed. Tension pneumothorax," the medic on board said. "I can't needle it. The pressure differential is too weird down here. If I punch the chest, I might kill him." "That's why I'm here," Casey said. She opened her waterproof kit. The bell lurched violently. The tether cable groaned outside. "We're losing the cable," the pilot shouted from the surface. "Rhodes, you have 3 minutes before that cable snaps. You need to stabilize him now, so we can blow the ballast tanks." 3 minutes to perform a chest tube insertion in a hospital was routine. To do it in a pressurized tin can, swinging in a storm, knowing that a mistake would suck the air out of the man's lungs, was impossible. Casey looked at Ricks. "This is going to hurt, sir." "Do it, Chief," Ricks gritted out. Casey didn't use a scalpel. She used a specialized trocar. She felt the rib space. She timed the sway of the bell. Left, Right. Pause. Thunk. She drove the tube in. A hiss of escaping air. Blood splattered her face. Lung is re-inflating, she called out, checking the valve. Spine is secured. Blow the tanks. Get us out of here. Blowing ballast in 3, 2, 1. The bell shuddered. There was a massive metallic groan, and then the sensation of rising. Fast. Too fast. Slow it down, Casey yelled. We're going to get the bends. We can't, the pilot replied. The tether just snapped. You're free-floating. Brace for surface breach. The bell rocketed upward. Casey threw her body over the commander, shielding him with her own armor as they flew toward the surface. They breached the water like a cork from a champagne bottle, launching 10 feet into the air before crashing back down into the waves. Inside, everything went black for a second. When Casey opened her eyes, she was bruised, bleeding from a cut on her forehead, and nauseous. But the monitor on Rick's chest was beeping steadily. Everyone alive? She gasped. We're good, Chief, a SEAL whispered, patting her on the back. We're good. You got us. Casey leaned her head back against the cold steel wall and closed her eyes. She imagined Dr. David complaining about a paper cut. She started to laugh. It was 2 weeks later when the atmosphere at Mercy General finally began to settle. The rumors about the helicopter nurse had started to fade into urban legend, twisted and reshaped by those who had stayed behind. Dr. Gregory David was back at the helm, and if anything, his ego had swollen to fill the void Casey had left. He stood at the central nurses' station, leaning casually against the counter, while a group of wide-eyed medical students hung on his every word. He looked impeccable hair, gelled to perfection, lab coat starched stiff, a $5,000 watch glinting under the fluorescent lights. It was a chaotic scene naturally, David was saying, gesturing broadly with a chart. Special Forces operations are messy, but when the team leader panicked, I had to step in. I directed the extraction protocols. You see, in trauma medicine, it's not just about cutting. It's about command presence. That poor nurse. Rhodes, was it? She completely froze. I had to practically push her onto the bird just to get her out of the way. Brenda, standing a few feet away, organizing patient files, rolled her eyes so hard it hurt. She knew the truth. They all did. But nobody stood up to David. He was the golden goose, the revenue generator, the face on the hospital billboards. So she's gone then? One of the students asked. The nurse? Oh, absolutely. David scoffed, checking his reflection in a dark window. Abandonment of post is a serious offense. I filed the termination paperwork myself the moment the dust cleared. We can't have unstable employees running off with thud. The sound of heavy double doors slamming open cut him off. The noise didn't come from the ambulance bay. It came from the main lobby entrance. The bustling noise of the waiting room died down instantly, replaced by a hushed, confused silence that rippled through the hallway like a wave. David frowned, annoyed at the interruption. Security. What is going on down there? He turned around, expecting a rowdy patient. What he saw made the blood drain from his face. Walking down the center of the main corridor was a phalanx of 4 men in dark suits, wearing earpieces and dark sunglasses, the universal uniform of federal agents. Flanking them were 2 uniformed Navy officers, their dress whites gleaming ribbons, stacked high on their chests. And in the center of the formation walked a woman. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She wasn't wearing the oversized, stained uniform of the janitorial staff. She was wearing a tailored charcoal gray power suit that fit her like a second skin. Her hair, usually trapped in a frizzy bun, was down, cascading over her shoulders in sleek waves. She wore black stilettos that clicked against the linoleum with a rhythmic, predatory cadence. Click, click, click. It took David a full 10 seconds to realize who he was looking at. Rhodes. He whispered the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. Casey didn't stop until she was 3 feet from him. The agents fanned out effectively, blocking the hallway, while the medical students scrambled back, sensing the shift in power. Casey removed her sunglasses slowly. Her eyes were the same, that piercing, intelligent grey, but the diffidence was gone. The mouse had been eaten by the lion. "Dr. David," she said. Her voice was cool, smooth, and carried a weight that echoed off the walls. "I trust you've been keeping my trauma bay warm." David laughed nervously, a high-pitched sound that betrayed his fear. "Your trauma bay, Ms. Rhodes. I don't know why you're here or why you've brought a parade, but you don't work here anymore. I fired you. Remember?" "I remember you trying," Casey said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. She turned to the older man in the Navy uniform beside her. "Admiral Graves, would you mind updating the doctor on the current administrative status of Mercy General?" Admiral Graves stepped forward. He was a terrifying man, built like a tank with a voice like grinding gravel. He held a thick leather folio. "Dr. David," Graves barked. "As of 0800 hours this morning, the Department of Defense has invoked the National Critical Capabilities Defense Act. Due to the strategic importance of the personnel discovered at this location specifically, Chief Rhodes, the Navy, has purchased a controlling stake in this facility's trauma and emergency medicine department." David blinked. You bought the ER. "We bought the building, son," Graves corrected, "and we installed a new director of operations to oversee the transition and ensure that our assets are treated with the respect they deserve." David looked at Henderson, the hospital administrator who was cowering behind the Admiral. Henderson gave a weak, apologetic wave. "Director of Operations," David stammered. "Who?" Casey stepped forward. She didn't say a word. She simply reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a new ID badge. She clipped it onto her lapel. It didn't say, "Support Staff." It was gold with a black stripe. It read, "C. Rhodes, Director of Emergency Medicine, Board Chair." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the heart monitors seemed to beep quieter. "You," David gasped. "But you're a nurse. You cleaned the floors." "I'm a Master Chief Hospital Corpsman with 20 years of combat experience, a PhD in trauma surgery from the Uniformed Services University, and a specialized certification in austere environment resuscitation." Casey listed off, ticking them on her fingers. "And yes, I also clean floors. Because unlike you, Gregory, I don't think any job is beneath me, if it helps the patient." She took a step closer, invading his personal space. David shrank back against the counter. "Now about your employment," Casey said softly. I have tenure," David squeaked. "You can't fire me without cause." "Oh, I have cause," Casey said, glancing at the charts. "Incompetence, harassment, falsifying records. I could fire you, revoke your license, and have you escorted out by these very nice gentlemen with guns." David looked at the agents. They didn't look nice. They looked like they were hoping he would run. "But I'm not going to do that," Casey continued. David exhaled, his knees shaking. You're not?" "No, because despite your personality, you have good hands. You're a decent surgeon when you aren't busy looking in the mirror." Casey picked up a clipboard. "And we are short-staffed." She turned to Brenda. Brenda, do we have any openings on the night shift? Brenda grinned, a wicked, delightful smile spreading across her face. Actually, Director, we do. We need a junior attending for the graveyard shift. Weekends and holidays. Co-pays and minor lacerations mostly, and bedpan duty when the nurses are busy. Casey turned back to David. There you go. You're demoted. Probationary status. You report to the charge nurse on duty. You speak when spoken to. You do the grunt work. And if you survive 6 months without a single complaint, maybe we'll let you touch a scalpel again. David looked around the room. The students were snickering. The nurses were beaming. He was humiliated. He was beaten. Do I have a choice? He whispered. Sure, Casey said, gesturing to the exit. The door is right there. But I hear the job market for surgeons who were fired by the US Navy is pretty slim. David swallowed his pride. It was a large, bitter pill. He hung his head. I'll take the shift. Good answer, Casey said. She clapped her hands, the sound startling him. Now get out of my hallway. You're blocking traffic. Go scrub in. Bed 4 has an ingrown toenail that needs looking at. As David shuffled away, stripped of his dignity and his kingdom, Casey turned to the Admiral. Thank you, sir. I can take it from here. Graves nodded, a rare smile cracking his face. Give 'em hell, Chief. As the military entourage turned to leave, Casey Rhodes took a deep breath. She looked at the chaos of the ER, the ringing phones, the crying babies, the rushing gurneys. She slipped off her blazer, revealing a set of navy blue scrubs underneath. She tied her hair back up with a rubber band. All right, everyone, she shouted, her voice ringing with authority. Show's over. Back to work. We save lives here. We don't just watch them move. And as the staff scrambled into action for the first time in years, Mercy General didn't feel like a workplace. It felt like a team, and at the center of it, no longer a mouse, but a lioness, stood the nurse they would never ignore again. And that is the story of Casey Rhodes, the silent warrior who taught an entire hospital that respect isn't about the title on your badge, but the character in your soul. She proved that heroes walk among us every day, sometimes pushing mops, sometimes saving lives in the dark, waiting for the moment they are needed. If you enjoyed this story of undercover justice and military precision, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. What did you think of Dr. David's punishment? Was it enough, or did he deserve to be fired? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.